When you visit a new place, for example, a new vacation spot, a new work environment, or a church, has it ever happened to you that you had a completely different picture of this place than you had before? That it somehow looks different in reality? Hi, Dovann here, and welcome to another episode of Week at a Glance, where we dive into a thoughtful summary of this week's Bible study guide. Thank you for joining me today. In this episode, we are talking about Jesus, the Master Teacher. We often have very specific images in mind when we think of a new and unknown place. When we are in this place, however, we usually notice that our imagination has little in common with reality. I remember the time before my daughter was born. My wife and I were talking about the delivery room where a daughter would be delivered and how this entire process will be. One day, as part of the pregnancy preparation course, we had a tour in the maternity station of the hospital and visited several delivery rooms. We noticed that in our imagination, it had looked completely different, and it was nice to have a clear picture of where our daughter would be born. Before Jesus was born, the image that the people of Israel had of God in their minds was quite far from reality. This was a time when religion was so distorted that people had a wrong image of God, and it became an overwhelming burden on their shoulders. During this time, God sent Jesus, the Master Teacher, to show the true image of God to humanity. Now, here are the important points to remember for today's episode. Our first point is called Jesus, the image of God. When Jesus came to earth, he showed people who and how the Father is. Through Jesus' incarnation, it was possible to see the character of God clearly through Jesus in a way that is tangible for us humans. The Father has given us His Son Jesus to dispel false views about Him and to show us the truth about God. It is in the face of Jesus that we gain the clearest knowledge of God. By the time of Jesus, the people of Israel had hit rock bottom. Jesus had to confront their wrong picture of God as well as their wrong teachings. When we read the Gospels, we notice again and again how Jesus went against the common notions of that time and showed them through His love who God really is. Everything Jesus did in His life on earth had a singular purpose, and that is the revelation of God for the uplifting of humanity. In John chapter 14, Jesus says, "He who has seen me has seen the Father." This is pivotal. This means that you and I can have a perfect picture of God through Jesus' life, teachings, and deeds. Humanity has lost the perfect image of God, but through Jesus, God's ultimate revelation of Himself, we get a clear picture of God's image. In episode 4, we talked about one of the goals of Christian education, and that is to restore in man the image of God. So how does God set about the work of recreating His image in the souls of men? Let's look at the next point. Our second point is called Jesus, the light of the world. God first illuminates our hearts and minds with the light of His divine love, and He did that through Jesus. Just as God at creation used light to dispel darkness, He has given us His Son Jesus to dispel false views about Him and to show us the truth about God. It is in the face of Jesus, like I said before, that we gain the clearest knowledge of who God is. The first recorded words of God in Genesis brought forth light where there has only been darkness. Not only did God create natural light, He sent His Son to be the light of the world. In the New Testament, John tells us that Jesus is the light of men and that He enlightens every man. Jesus, the light of God, came into our planet when the world's darkness was deepest. And in the person of Jesus, you and I have the whole and pure and perfect light of God. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 tells us that God is shining in our hearts to let us know that His glory is seen in Jesus. The purpose of God shining in our hearts is to give us light. The purpose of light is to acquaint us with the knowledge of the divine glory. And the purpose of the knowledge of the divine glory is to save us. Jesus, the light of the world, wants to transform you. He wants you to accept Him as the Master Teacher. He wants you to become more and more like Him. And He wants to be your greatest role model. This brings us to our final point. Point number 3 is Jesus, the greatest example. The best Bible passage that I can think of when we talk about Jesus' humility and that He is our greatest example is in Philippians chapter 2, where it says, "Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied Himself, taking the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of men, being found in appearance as a man, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Through the healing, teaching, and preaching ministry and the life and death of Jesus, we are reminded that there is so much to learn from the Master Teacher. And among them, one of my favorites actually is Jesus' humility. Jesus, the Creator, the eternal God, humbled Himself in an incredible way so that we could be reconciled with God. This humility is worth imitating. We should follow His example. What does this mean in concrete terms? You and I should meet the people around us with humility and love and submit to one another, just as we are supposed to humble ourselves before God. Then God's great work of education and salvation will be accomplished. And just as God has reconciled us to Himself through Jesus Christ, so you and I are called to continue this ministry of reconciliation. And Jesus prays to the Father as He sends you to continue this ministry of reconciliation in your own sphere. In John 17, Jesus is praying, "As you sent me into this world, so I also sent them to the world." Adventist education succeeds when you and I reflect the image of God in our daily lives. Then, not only do we reach the goal of being reunited with God, but also others will be drawn to Jesus and be reunited with Him. We quickly have a different picture in our head of an unknown place or a known situation or even a person that is not so well known to us. Just like I had the wrong idea about the delivery room before I saw it. It is the same with God. People had a wrong picture of Him in their minds, but Jesus came into our world and showed you and me what God really is like. He is our master teacher. He is the greatest role model. Let us make a conscious effort to spend more time with Him this week so that we can become more like Him. In summary, here are the different points that we talked about in today's episode on Jesus, the master teacher. Point number 1, Jesus, the image of God. Point number 2, Jesus, the light of the world. And finally, Jesus, the greatest example. If you find this episode helpful, then please share it with a friend. Spread the word and change lives one message at a time. And if you want to learn about the biblical worldview, then click on this video right here. This is again Dovann for Week at a Glance. I'll see you again next week.